Hello, my name is Paul Dayton, and I'm here to talk to you about my second book here, Socialism, the Gift That Keeps On Taking. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about today about the issue of slavery, the pervasive global phenomenon. There's a fiction amongst the victim politics industry and its little offshoot industry, the race industry, that preys upon the ignorance, is dependent upon the ignorance of their audience, their flock, which will be cured through simple banality. In this book, we chronicle thousands and thousands of years of slavery. We focus on the United States experience, the colossally expensive so called free labor, the fiction that uh, the plantation owners were able to profit off of free of charge labor when in fact slaves, especially field slaves, were incredibly expensive, the equivalent of buying very expensive farm equipment today. In fact, to have paid wages to the slaves and saved the low upfront cost would have eased the cash flow situation of the farmers immensely. It really was not that beneficial. In other words, instead of having to pay more than the cost of several houses for one field hand slave up front, instead of having to do that, if they just pay them a certain amount each week, they would have more money. The farmer, the plantation owner, would have much more money in their own pocket. It would have been it would have been beneficial to the plantation owner in terms of cost. They're very expensive. So that's just one fiction that we correct through simple banality in this book. Now, I'm going to read from you just a couple of pages here. This one is called, beginning of the section is Slavery, a Pervasive Global Phenomenon. The asinine and insulting popular myth regarding Africans being unique as peoples enslaved will be dispensed with first. Throughout the world, for at least 4 millennia of recorded human history, slavery and subjugation have been the norm. And so has the norm been that the slaver and enslaved were of the same variety of skin tone. As has been illustrated elsewhere in this text, prosperity is neither natural state of affairs, nor does it come automatically to those who happen to be in possession of land with so-called natural resources. Mechanized human transport only came to be during the 19th century AD, and then only in certain parts of the world, and in the hands of certain peoples. For example, does everyone in the USA today own a motor vehicle? Of course not. Throughout the world, geographical convenience has been the predominant factor in choosing who one might attempt to conquer, ally with, subjugate, or otherwise commingle. It is true that Africans have been no exception to this plain reality. That is, Africans have been capturing and enslaving Africans for as long as anyone has been keeping track. To think of these diverse peoples monolithically as Africans is incorrect and misleading. The many African tribes or nations have been far from a unified group acting in concert. Quite the opposite has been the case historically. And the northern Africans have always been the closest to Europe and West Asia, or the Middle East, and have absorbed the superior technology and culture to some degree, which of course advanced these Africans, while the southern Africans were insulated from nearly all contact with the outside world by geography of the land, and therefore were less advanced and made for easier prey at the hands of their continental neighbors to the north. The Africans who were sold, winding up in North America, were southern Africans that were captured and enslaved by the northern Africans. Interracial relations have been unfathomable to all cultures. The USA, from its outset, and even during the colonial period, has been the most well-integrated multiracial society in world history. Occurring during 1539 in Mexico, or New Spain, on the west coast of the North region, a small search party comprised of a French friar, Marco de Niza, several Indians, a black named Esteban, and others set out to explore in search of wealthy cities. Esteban went ahead of the others and was murdered by local Indians in short order. These Indians could not believe that interracial comedy could be legitimate, as they met the Negro man's story about his traveling companions with disbelief. The Indians also found Esteban to be cowardly, deceptive, greedy, and without morals. The origin of the term describing an enslaved person is described by Henri Pirine. The word slave is, of course, simply the word Slav. End of quote. The Slavs have always been getting subjugated and traded by one culture or another, so much so that even as the ordinary enslavement of locals permeated every land, merchants and traders traveling far and wide noted the ubiquity of Slavs among the subjugated, so that the term for the condition was derived from the name of their race. If Africans were in fact the preeminent candidates for slavery around the world, and for all times, wouldn't we expect those in the condition to be termed Afros or something else derivative of their particular characteristics? Brazil imported far more slaves than the United States. 1 million Europeans, at the very least, were enslaved by northern African pirates during the time span 1500 to 1800 alone. In ancient Eurasia, from minimally the 8th century BC, the royal Scythians divided their society into 4 layers, as was customary in Central Eurasian societies until the Mongol Empire's rule. 4 layers plus 1 ruler. The dominant class viewed all others as their slaves, as would become customary in Central Eurasia by succeeding cultures. During the 19th century in North America, Indians were enslaved by Mexicans. In January of 1846, Jim Clyman wrote of Californians being more or less aimless drifters with minimal skill for hunting. They enslaved Indians to perform the hard labor. The California Territory was owned by Mexico at that time. We'll go ahead here just a little bit here. And let's see here. For thousands of years, nearly everybody has paid servants in less wealthy countries due to their affordability, but less so in more wealthy countries in which opportunity is more plentiful and overall level of wealth is greater. In 969 AD, Luprand, Bishop of Cremona, visited Byzantium. Being from a poor land, he disdained that the Greeks were, quote, rich in gold, but poor in servants, end quote. An example of Europeans enslaving Europeans can be found during the Carolingian era, during the time of Charlemagne. So-called adventurers would purchase Carolingian prisoners of war, thereafter selling these men as slaves to the pagan Slavs on the Elbe and the Saale. In Europe, back in the year 376 AD, one nation was so destitute that they volunteered to be enslaved. The Visigoths fled their former land after defeat at the hands of the Huns, where the Romans agreed to permit them to enter the Eastern Roman Empire as refugees. The Romans promptly robbed them blind and broke up the Visigoth families, eventually leading the Goths to consenting to self-enslavement in Rome. And with that, we're going to end this sort of free preview, this excerpt here, on the issue of slavery around the world. We cover that in a big chapter in this book. Again, the book is Socialism, the Gift That Keeps On Taking. My website is pauldayton.us. I encourage you to have a great day, and I thank you for joining me.